All right, we will call to order the special joint meeting of the 2023 Colorado River Water Conservation District Budget Workshop. We have 6 items on our agenda today, including 2 budget workshops. We'll start with the roll call.
Martha Whitmore. Kathy Chandler Henry.
Someone
Present.
told me that you have to speak into the speaker, into the microphone, and make sure the microphone's on.
I'm green. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Martha Whitmore. Kathy Chandler Henry.
Present.
Mark Rober.
Present.
Steve Beckley.
Present.
Mike Richard.
Here.
Kathleen Curry.
Here.
Stan Winery. Scott McGinnis.
Here.
Tom Gray.
Yep.
Mark Catlin.
Here.
John Ely. Alden Vandenbrink. Doug Monger.
Here.
Reby Hazard. Taylor Haas. Here.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. It looks like a good 2 days ahead of us. And Marty sends her apologies that she can't join us this afternoon. So, Andy, do you have any comments before we jump into the workshop?
Madam Chair, we do not. I think the agenda from the staff's perspective should stand as printed, and look forward to the meeting.
All right, any other questions or additions to the agenda for today? All right, our amazing finance director, we'll turn it over to you.
If I could just introduce Ian Phillips as our Director of Financial and Administrative Services. You've met Ian plenty of times before. He is the man on top of all the numbers at the district. I'm going to walk through the budget in a fairly high level, but we would encourage you to, feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go along. Trying to keep it at a level that is helpful for you. So if there are details that we're missing as we move through it, please feel free to ask. We have our all the senior staff here at the River District is also present. So if there are subject matter questions on their fields, then they too will be able to speak up and talk. So with that, Ian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. So created a PowerPoint that Stephanie is going to kind of walk through as we go through the presentation. Just so it'll be up on the screen as we're kind of going through it. As Andy said, this is a workshop. We want to encourage questions. So again, feel free to interrupt me anytime. We're going to start the day. Sorry, yes, please.
While Director McGinnis is getting logged in, just to let you know, there are folks online joining us for this meeting. So welcome to all of the folks who are online. I think some of you are here or for the community funding partnership later on in the afternoon. And we do have one member of the press, Heather Sackett from Aspen Journalism is here. Welcome.
So question then, Ian, so if I could, Madam Chair, so while we're waiting here for a second, so we're actually approving the budget during our November meeting, isn't that correct? So this is a budget workshop. And
October, yes.
October meeting. and
That's where we'll have
actually approve
the hearing.
So
And what we're really looking for from the board is direction on the proposed budget. We really just want to make sure that we're heading in the right direction on all these items. And if you see places we need to improve on, we will take that time to do that between now and October. Budget is what we recommend, but it is absolutely what you set and determine. So, and as Ian will get into it, we have, several different sub budgets, if you will, for the River District. And so we'll break those down and walk through them as we go. And you'll note some one-time cash transfers that we're doing on the general fund. Ian's going to talk about that. That's probably the most unusual aspect of the budget this time around. But in general, we're feeling pretty good about the budget until we hear from you, that is. So.
Okay, so just kind of a quick rundown of how things will go this afternoon. We're going to start with the general fund. We're going to start with revenue. And then we're going to move into the 2022 proposed amended expenditures. And then the 2023 proposed expenditures within the general fund. Then we'll move on to the capital fund. And then we'll move into the community funding partnership fund. And we'll wrap up with the enterprise fund. So on the budget, the general summary, you'll see that we're starting out 2022 with a beginning fund balance of 4.8 million. And our property tax revenues, 2022 was not a reappraisal year. Those values are determined from the prior year. We'll have another reappraisal year next year in 2023. And those values in 23 will translate into 2024 tax revenue. So there's a little bit of a lag there. But the 2023 valuations will have an appraisal date of June 30th of 2022. So on this levy spreadsheet that is up on the screen, it's a little hard to read, but on the bottom line, there's a figure in bold. That is the increase in valuations from 21 to 2022. And that number is about 4.5%. Now you'll see most of the counties had very little change within plus or minus 2%, with the exception of Garfield and Rio Blanco. Those county valuations are up significantly. New construction has also increased significantly at 23% from 2021. And new primary oil and gas has increased substantially from 2021 to over 300%. So as I mentioned, the next year, 2023 will be a reappraisal year. So the surge in real estate sales and building permits will be reflected in those 2023 valuations, which will then translate into 2024 tax revenue. So if we can move to the next chart to show the general fund revenue. This is just showing to emphasize the growth in valuations now correlates to growth in revenue due to the passage of 7A, where we were able to remove the Tabor revenue limitations. And also, we were able to get to do away with the Gallagher amendment with that passage of 7A as well. So we are truly realizing an increase in revenue with the increase in valuations.
I would just point out that Gallagher amendment happened to be modified at the same general election, but not by question 7A, but by a companion piece that was statewide. So we did benefit from that in terms of the impacts. But the 7A did not only increase the mill levy for the district, it did debruce the district's revenue and removed a statutory limitation of a 5.5% growth in revenue that's contained in the state statute. So so that's part of why there's continued increase in the revenue.
Thank you.
And Ian,
Yes.
I don't know if any of your counties have looked at their assessment for June 30th, 2022 as a reassessment date. Our assessor thinks our values are going to be up 60% residential, 60, which is just shocking. People are going to be shocked about that. So we haven't sort of sorted through what that means and what we're going to do about that, but that could be a corresponding jump. I think resort counties particularly are going to see that increase. The June 30th, 2022 was right at the top of the housing market. So, yeah. that assessment rate gets set by the legislature now every year or every 2 years. So it's going down from 7 point something to 6.85 or something. So the assessment rate's going to go down. So that's going to have some effect as well.
Okay. So if you can go on to the next slide, we're gonna move away from property tax, still within income. We're gonna just hit on specific ownership tax briefly. Interestingly enough, the specific ownership tax was created in 1937. And this is a tax that's assessed on motor vehicles annually and is calculated based on the vehicle's age and the original value of the vehicle. We're predicting close to 800,000 in specific ownership tax revenue for 2022. It's a little tough to predict this figure, so we're carrying that projection into 2023 and 2024. Moving on down to interest income. This figure does contain a little bit of property tax interest. However, we are seeing rates beginning to rise, continuing to rise. The US 2-year Treasury is currently around 2.6 or 7%. And I believe the feds are meeting next week to discuss another change in rates. Going on down to our other income, we do have a significant figure in here of just over 50,000 from our prior healthcare group when we ended using Western Slope Healthcare and we went with another group. That group dissolved, and so we've got a fund distribution in that figure of just over 50,000. We also have over 40,000 for some reimbursements on the Lower Basin tour later this year is in that number as well. And the other items in that figure are related to projects where we have cost shares, like the cloud seeding operations, and we have some USGS cost sharing revenue in there as well. Yes. Director.
Well, I'll take that. None of the directors or employees of the district are reimbursing the district for their travel expenses. Your travel expenses will be paid by the district. We are, however, hosting almost the entire Southwest board, their staff, several of our CWCB West Slope members, directors, along with the CWCB director from the Rio Grande. We're having Becky Mitchell and Dan Gibbs from the state will be on the tour. And then a few of our water users from the various basins are also coming. So anybody not either lucky enough to volunteer all their time as a director for the River District or who works for the River District is going to be hit with a bill at the end of the trip, a proportionate bill for that. So. Yeah. No, we are not getting reimbursed by the Met or anybody like that. So don't worry about that.
Okay, so one thing that you might notice about the proposed amended 2022 budget in the general fund is that it is not a balanced budget. And that's due to these proposed transfers that Andy mentioned earlier. Of $1.5 million to the community funding partnership and another $1.5 million to our capital fund.
For anybody who can't see this on the screen, if your eyes are as bad as mine, in your packet that you received, well, first you got the paper copies of these very pages that are being shown if you want to look at those, if you happen to bring those. If not, this document is on page 11 of 65 of the PDF. If you can see it easier on your computer, you're welcome to do that.
So without these transfers to our other funds, we're seeing an increase in expenditures of 4%. And that's kind of like our operations.
That's an increase from the proposed, the original approved budget to this amended budget. There's a 4% increase in those expenses between the two. Given the rate of inflation at about what was it announced yesterday? 8.4% year over year. Feel like holding it at 4 is good, but we do want to draw your attention to the fact that the overall increase is of 4%.
So go ahead.
Real quickly, so on our original budget, we had a lot less transfers. Where are we changing that now?
Sure. It's a great question. Actually, we're recommending a transfer of 3 million. You can see that under the additional transfer to the CFP in the capital projects fund. You're right. Maybe it's a total of 2.5 because we had a $500,000 transfer. Thanks. Director Beckley, if you don't mind, and just a reminder, if people can turn their microphones on when they ask questions, because we have people who are outside of the room. There's a little button there that the light will turn green. The question though is why are we having significantly more transfers? And I think this is my fault, so I'm going to answer it, and so Ian doesn't have to explain it. When I came on board in 2018, which is still on the far left column, you'll note that we only had carryover reserves about 1.8 million. And the thought there was that we should carry over about 3 months worth of expenses given the lag in property taxes. And that's what the policy had been. I took a very conservative approach when I came in, primarily because we hadn't passed 7A. And I could see a time where we were going to, even with some retirements on staff, run into a situation where our expenses were going to exceed the revenue. And I was trying to sack away some reserves in the event that we needed to cover that with money that was saved up. So this year they're hitting in 2022 almost $5 million there. And we felt that we don't need that $5 million in the general fund with the passage of 7A and the financial benefits that we just discussed. And we felt that money was better off both in the CFP fund, where we can then use it to directly leverage our priorities by helping our constituents. So moving $1.5 million over there, $1 million more than we had proposed roughly in the original budget. And then with the capital fund, we'll get to the budget, but you'll see that we've been depleting the capital fund and we hadn't added anything to the capital fund since 2019. And we felt we've got some ongoing expenses, frankly, the renovation of the office and the continued replacement of fleet vehicles. I want to point out not an expansion of them, but just a replacement. It's expensive. We have the water conservation and efficiency landscaping project at the office, software purchases to help us become more efficient with things like the CFP. All of that falls into that capital fund. And so we really wanted to try to bolster that as well. But we're walking away in the proposed budgeting process with just over 2 million, so 2.2 million carryover both in 23 and 24. And from my perspective and Ian's perspective and Audrey, the three of us have had a lot of discussions about it. We feel that that's adequate reserves and carryover for the general fund, but we're trying to really build up the capital fund and the CFP fund in particular, so that we're ready and poised to do kind of some larger projects with those funds. Does that help?
It does. So $2.2 million budget is expenditures are 11. Could be about that's the lower end, right? 20%. Certainly, where we were before was way
So, and in that calculation, we excluded the transfer to the community funding partnership of 4 million because
It's, sorry.
it's really, we're trying to cover our operations for those first 3 months of the next year within the general fund. And that transfer to the CFP fund occurs in June, once we have enough tax receipts, revenue collected to make that transfer. So, the big tax receipts start to come in April. So it's really just enough to cover our operations.
Yeah.
And we don't really consider the CFP operations in the general fund for that. So that's how we came to that figure, which is probably, hopefully going to make you more comfortable
Right.
and not.
Yeah, because the reserves now are much higher percentage of what our actual expenditures are. Not because the others is a transfer. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You bet. Good question.
Is it, oh, sorry, once money's transferred to the CFP fund, is it kind of locked up there if you needed it to come back to the general?
This board could tell us to move it back to the general fund anytime this board wants.
Okay,
Okay, but we would not do that or could not do that without authorization from the board.
So I had a similar question as well. So, and again, when we passed 7A, we had committed to our public and the rest of our voters and the rest that we were going to be putting money into there. I'm concerned here of the logistics and the look of things, that we still had 2021 at 4221 and we had 2022 at 4221 on the transfer to CFP, and then 23 and 24. So all of the money, so I'm asking a procedure question. All of the money goes into the general fund. And so we're still then allowed to be discretionary about how much money this board puts back into the CFP and or the capital fund out of the 7A monies. I thought we were more a little bit lined up and tied up.
No,
And-
you represented we all represented, I represented to the voters that we would be transferring a minimum of 4.2 million a year. And so that's the, now it doesn't come into that fund. We set up that fund later just to be able to demonstrate its accounting and transparency to the voters. We could do all of that CFP within the general budget and.
No, I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So what this is we're keeping that number the same so that any voter or anybody with public interest in mind can say, are they doing what they said they were going to do? We're transferring that 4.2 every year. The question then is for the board every year is, do we have other money, additional revenue that we want to contribute to the CFP to continue to help our constituents? So far, since we've established it, we had the 600,000 transfer last year. We proposed a 550 this year. We're going higher because of the reasons we just discussed. But this board could say we're just putting 4.2 and no more in at any given point. Frankly, as our legal counsel will point out, you could actually put less than 4.2 because you could keep it in your general fund. Wouldn't recommend that, not suggesting that, just want to be clear about your legal abilities as the director, as the board of directors.
So I guess to follow that up, and I guess I'm actually going the other way a little bit. We're actually having rising property taxes. I thought and still think maybe that we ought to have 4.2 be in the base number, and whatever our increased escalation of property taxes should be allocated to the 4.2. So it doesn't look like we're such kind-hearted people and we're given 1.5, we're only given 1.2 or something, because the 4.2 with inflation and escalation went up to 4.5, for instance. So it's all math. And so I'm all good with it. I just, that stuck to me when I was reviewing the packet. So, that we're having rising property taxes and the fund ought to rise with, our moral obligation. I think it kind of rolls back to our moral obligation that we feel that we sold 7A on. I don't make it look like we're such kind-hearted. And I'm not a kind-hearted person. Nobody will ever claim me of that, ever do that. So.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I do think it's it's a question. I think, you know, this board had indicated previously very clearly, I think, to us that you wanted to look at the additional allocations on an annual basis to the CFP fund, because you recognize there may be priorities that the district has that are better addressed through outside of the CFP fund. And that's every year you make a determination as to how much you actually additional funds beyond that 4.2 that you transfer in. And that gives you, as the representatives of the 15 counties, the ability to make sure you're meeting the primary goals and objectives of the district while staying true to 7A, which is where we said we would put 4.2 million a year into that program.
Yeah,
And-
Director,
Sorry, go ahead.
say Director Munger, I really agree with you. I think, I mean, because our revenues are going up because the value of a property mill is going up. So we sold 7A as a mill levy increase. So I think especially in 2024, this shows flat revenues, but they're not going to be flat. So I think that's going to be a big discussion, maybe not for 23, but for 24.
And as Andy suggested, you know, my counsel has always been that you undertake this on a year-to-year basis, that you not establish any moral obligation of the River District as an entity. You might feel that as an individual director, that's fine, as to the intent of 7A, but that the actual language of the amendment, you know, did not bind the River District in that manner. And in order to protect the River District as an entity, I recommend that you undertake this on an annual basis, the determination. And I believe that some of the additional revenue is also not just attributable to the increase from 7A, but attributable to the increase from the debrucing aspect of the measure, which was not so related to the CFP goals.
Director McGinnis?
Thank you, Peter. I think that's well stated, and because there's several factors that are combining for this income. I just want us to be, and I'm glad we're doing this on an annual basis. I foresee a future of some pretty heavy litigation expenses. And we keep saying, well, we owe to help the people. Every penny we're spending is helping the people. So before we earmark, I mean, we're meeting our obligation. And frankly, I could go to a lot of people and they don't even know what the obligation is. But I don't want to, negotiate against ourselves and keep building that fund over what we're obligated to do, because clawbacks are very, very difficult. A lot of promises are made up front, but memories are quickly lost. And then when we need it, we're going to have, because this program of handing out funds to local communities is fantastic. But Mesa County, we've had 4 all of a sudden overnight. I think that's going to explode. The temptation will be to go, well, let's keep, we committed 4.1 or whatever. Let's put some more and put some more. The day will come when we better cover some litigation expenses. And we're not meeting, and all of a sudden we're going to be faced with people saying, hey, you're breaking your promises and all that kind of stuff. So I just would be very cautious before we go over what we're obligated, and very aggressive in considering future obligations, particularly litigation based on this last year and now with the Colorado River. We better make sure our general fund is well funded and prepared for battle, meeting our obligation, but before we start to serve the seconds on dessert.
Thank you. Anyone?
My beginning question was, there's a lot of uncertainty out there on some things that we all know about. And while I understand we can transfer money back from the CFP fund, I think that's awkward, because then you have to call it out. And along with Director Beckley's concern, yeah, we may be in a time when we need to keep more than 25% because of the uncertain times ahead.
Thanks. Anything else on revenue
I just want to make, I appreciate the conversation,
Yeah.
Peter, Andy, and again, I think we all needed to have a rehash of the remembering of what the heck we did here and doing. So I appreciate the discussion and the rest. So I'm good with that too. And I think that's good for us to put in our hysterical mind here about, how and what we're doing things. Yep.
And I'm just trying to seek a consensus direction from the board. Remember, this is a workshop. Is the board, generally okay with this year's transfer or proposed transfer of 1.5 into the CFP and 1.5 into the capital projects, or would you like us to dial those down and leave more money in the general fund? Because I think I'm hearing some different, some direction, but I want to make sure I hear it correctly.
I would recommend, this is me speaking, I think that I'd recommend leaving more in the general fund for now. Is what you're going to do is you're still proposing 4.2 million next year. We could always, put in an additional 750 this year and then have the option to put another 750 in next year. Just kind of see what happens. This is an interesting year for water, as we all know. So I wouldn't mind keeping a little bit more in the general fund just as a cushion.
Director Curry and then Director Monger.
Thank you. I support those remarks from Director Becker.
Thanks. Director Monger, did you?
So I'm all right. Either way, I support the concept. I mean, even for this year, right now, in 2022, we're going to have a supplemental budget. We could do that at the end of the year too, in 2023. So we could budget a lesser amount and come through with a supplemental budget at the end toward 2023, when we know that, well, what the Colorado River is doing and what the reservoir is doing too.
Director Gray, did you have some?
I think what Director Beckley said, I agree with.
All right, Director Haas. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd support those comments as well. I guess one question, do we have a litigation fund? Do we keep that money separate, or is that tracked in our general fund?
We have a litigation line item under and special counsel under both the general fund budget and the enterprise fund budget.
So it's a line item every year that,
Yep.
but it's not
But
one we
there's
can
no,
build over time if we needed to.
Well, we could if you appropriate it for that year, but historically we have not.
Thanks.
I think that's solid direction. I think we're good. And that was with respect to just to be clear, the CFP fund, capital projects fund. I would ask that the board hold off on direction on that until we get to the capital fund, project fund budget, so we can talk collectively about where those numbers are in that fund and then make that call. I think good direction on the CFP, but then we'll get to the capital project fund in a minute.
Okay, that was some great discussion. Thank you for that. So jumping down into the expenditures now, we're going to talk about 2022 and then we'll move into 2023. So I'm going to focus on 2022 for now. So, staff salaries increased about 8% from our original 2022 budget. And that was due to that one-time cost of living adjustment for $2,500 per person. And that was provided to most employees. I think there were 3 employees that did not take that one-time cost of living adjustment. And the other factor there is the salary adjustments reflecting the regional wage pressure, that those adjustments were higher than anticipated originally. And it's important to recall that we split our expenditures with the enterprise fund. And those expenditures are split for each employee's tracked time between the 2 funds, with the exception of the employees that are at Wolford. They're 100% enterprise. So going on down, I'm trying to hit the highlights here. Travel increased a little bit, and that's due to the resumed normal travel with the lifted COVID-19 restrictions. Legal counsel had an increase of almost 10%. And that's mainly due to some engineering consultants in Division 4 on the Ramshorn project case. Admin expenses jumped up significantly by 30%. That's mainly due to this lower basin fact-finding mission that is happening later this year, as well as some increased vehicle maintenance and software support expenditures. Continuing on down, the technical support line item also increased substantially by 20%. This is mainly due to the interstate watershed account or interstate watershed management account. And that's where we house the cloud seeding operations and some USGS expenditures. So we had some unanticipated USGS costs come up in 2022, but there's a revenue component to that. There's a cost share, and that is up above in the other income account that I mentioned earlier. Let's see, keep going on down. Next thing I was going to talk about was the fund balance and the transfers, but we've covered that pretty well. So I think we're going to move on into 2023 expenditures unless there are any questions. Okay, seeing none. Now the 2023 budget is balanced. We are showing increases in almost all the line items there from 2022, with the exception of a few of those lines. In total, we're seeing an increase in expenses of about 9% in 2023. And we are also proposing another additional transfer to this community funding partnership fund of $300,000 for 2023. And no transfers to the capital fund. Going on down to kind of hit on the highlights. In the salary figure, we do have a salary increase for the pool of 5%, and that's based on the latest data that's been collected in early August from the resort area employers. We are budgeting about a 3% increase in health insurance costs next year. And you'll see there's a big increase in salary overhead of 13%. That's mainly due to a contingency for the employee housing ownership program of $50,000. That's a loan that's made to eligible employees on home purchases. And we also are reflecting a full year of benefits for new hires that were hired in 2011. For a lot of our benefits, you need to be on board for a year before those start to accrue. And we're seeing some of those come on in 2022, but in 2023, we'll have a full year of those.
And those were employees hired in 2021, not 2011.
Thank you. Thank you for catching that. Kind of moving on down.
If I could stop for a minute, I just want to highlight the couple of things. The health insurance increase of 3% is a really tremendously low number in today's world. Just want to thank Ian and Audrey for the work they do with our insurer on that. At their recommendation, you remember we switched insurance pools and we're tied in now with a group that is largely front range entities, and they seem to be able to help us keep our insurance costs down because their cost of medical care is less than it is on the West Slope. So it was a good move for us. I don't know how it's working out for them, but it is a positive thing. And I mean, we've seen years, I'm sure you all seen them in your own businesses and lives, but you know, the district had seen double-digit increases in years back to back to back. So it is truly something to recognize and celebrate that we're keeping that low. And I think it is important that we do that. The 5% recommended salary pool increase is consistent with this board's policy. We're following the Mountain States Employers Council data. And it is, they're seeing a 5% increase overall in wages. Just point out again, that is less than the rate of inflation. Our policy is not an inflationary policy. Our policy is a competitive wage policy. So we're looking at other employers in the area, and that's where that number comes from. So I just want to make sure the board understands that. And if you have questions about it, this is definitely an appropriate time to levy those questions. But those are big numbers and important issues. So wanted to make sure we highlighted that.
Questions, Director Gray?
I just wanted to go back to the administrative expenses, and Ian, you said that the increase in that was mainly from this lower basin tour. But as I look at it, I see that administrative expenses were in the 270 range for the last several years, and then we approved a budget of 277. It went to 362, and then it stays at almost 350 in the years after that when there's no lower basin tour. So I'm just curious how that could be.
It's a good question. We can get into the detail of that, and Stephanie, I'll be able to tell you what page. Okay, so on 8 of 9 of the detail. Yes, and Audrey, please jump in here if you're ready.
Yeah, one of the items that I wanted to call your attention to.
8 of 9, it says on the bottom of, let's see.
So that it's
19.
yeah, 19 of 65 in your PDF pack. $19 of 65 in your PDF packet. Administrative expenses.
Okay. Just a couple, 2023, we've included $30,000 for a consultant to work with the board and staff to update our strategic plan. So that is a new expense that we're proposing. And you may recall, we had a plan or a goal to update that every 5 years. And that was last reviewed in 2016. And then in 2024, we have 40,000 included for the next triennial salary survey. So those are a couple of those big items under administrative expenses, as well as kind of some anticipated increase in our HOA or our condo assessments and other vehicle maintenance items.
Thank you, Audrey. Does that answer your question, Director Gray?
Yeah, I'll have to look at it a little closer and see. It jumped out on me in the summary or the dot page there that we have that it didn't seem like an adequate answer, that it was because of a lower basin tour that we went up $80,000.
That's the jump from the original budget, and it stays up in that 350 range for those items Audrey just mentioned.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Other questions on the expenses?
Yeah, if I could.
Yeah.
And so you quickly mentioned the $50,000 for the, so I mean, we have money in the budget every year for housing and housing assistance and that, correct?
Typically, I believe we put a number in there. We did it this year because of some of the new employees that were hired
Yeah,
recently.
and we've agreed to that policy. It's all fine. I'm good with that, but it seems like we should have had some money in there all along anyhow. So.
I don't believe we had that in there in the
Oh,
original
wow. So,
budget.
okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian, this
Yes.
is Lucy. I apologize for my voice. We had the 50,000 in for 2022 originally. We've taken it out this year because we don't anticipate anybody buying a house through the end of the year, and then we've added it back in for 2023.
That's right. Thank you very much, Lucy.
And I had a question on external affairs. Could you talk about the decrease in that line item?
Yes, so in 2022 amended budget, we have a triannual water policy survey of a $50,000 budgeted expenditure for 2022. That is not in the 2023 budget. That's a triannual survey.
Thank you. Anything else, Director Curry?
Thank you. I had a question on external affairs also. I'm on page 8 of 9 of the hard copy. And the line item for Washington Council and lobbyist at 40,000. I'm so glad we have that, especially given the possibility that the Bureau of Reclamation could go to Congress looking for authority to re-examine Bureau projects up in the Upper Basin. You might remember that statement from the Water Congress presentation that the Bureau gave. So I think it's great that we have that line item. I hope it's adequate. If there is a move to amend statute to deal with the Colorado River situation, I'm sure we can revisit that if we need to, but I just am glad to see it and I just hope it's enough.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it's just time to point out, we do also have a $10,000 line item for Washington lobbyist in the enterprise. And it has more to do with, should we need money to rehab an asset of ours, might be lobbying the federal government fairly heavily on that. So we do have some money in there, and certainly if the Bureau or Interior were to go seek broader authority in the Colorado River over the objection of the Upper Basin states, it would be a first time in the history of Western water politics that they actually did something without the consent of 4 of the Upper Basin states. So it'd be pretty big reach for them, but I guess nothing's inconceivable at this point. So.
To you.
Okay, thank you. So the next line item we're going to touch on will be the technical support line item. You'll see that's a significant increase of 27% from the 2022 proposed amended budget. That's due to a contingency amount of 100,000 in case we get asked for any assistance in any of our major basins or on the main stem. There's 125,000 in there for wild and scenic endowment, and that was previously approved in the 2022 budget, but it's not happening in 22, so we're moving it over to 2023. We've got a significant increase in there for USGS gauging costs. We do have a cost share component on that, so that there's a portion of that that's in our revenue up above, but that figure is 8% increase from 2022. And then we have our annual transfer to the CFP fund of 4.2 million. Oh, yes. Yes. Yes.
Use the mic, just remember there are folks online.
The question would be that there's a significant increase on the budget for 2023 on Division 5 work plan.
Yeah, and we have a $50,000 number in there for development of conditional water rights. So I covered the transfer to the CFP fund.
Did you mention what the increase was with the Colorado Watershed Management, what that was?
Yes, good question. So for 2023, we're proposing an increase to that cost share agreement. with all the parties and the operations within there. And I believe that budget is basically doubled of what it has been in the past. And I think DK is here if you have more questions, or if I didn't respond to that correctly, but it's mainly due to the cloud seeding operations and the efforts out there.
Okay,
And we do have some increased cost share revenue for that as well.
okay, so the revenue is represented up in the revenue side.
Well, it will be, so this is an interesting program or bucket, we should probably refer to it as, because we collect this money in the early part of the year and we expend it based on how many events there would be. So if in a given year there weren't enough events to consume what we received, that then carries over into the next year. So in 2022, we brought in $80,000 from the prior cloud seeding year to expend in 2022. Even though we collected that revenue in 2021, we weren't able to expend it all because there weren't enough events for those operations to occur. So there's sort of there's a carryover, if you will, in that bucket each year. And, we kind of cut that off around August or September every year when the new contract gets executed and we roll those funds in.
Ian, if I can jump in, I think you kind of mixed two different cost shares in there. So the first one that he was talking about is the USGS, excuse me, the Colorado River or the Middle Colorado Watershed Council Grizzly Creek Studies JFA, which you all discussed and approved at the July quarterly meeting. So that's that big increase. It's a 3-year program in the Colorado Watershed Management line item, and that will be offset entirely under the income line item. Will be included in that in the budget that you approve in October. It's not currently listed in other income. That was something that was correct. That was something that we missed in this draft budget that we provided to you all.
So let me understand that we captured the expense, which I see here is almost a couple $100,000, but we didn't put in the revenue line item in this budget.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you.
The expenditure I think you were just referring to was the cloud seeding expenditure. And that's a couple $100,000.
It's the USGS one. There's an additional increase in the interstate watershed management related to the cloud seeding that you just explained the revenue offset there.
Yeah, because there was we went from 49,000 to 146 to 361. So I think there's two different things going on there. The 49 to 146 is probably what you're talking about, is the cloud seeding, and then the next
No,
one.
It's
No?
all the
That-
USGS.
That's under
Okay.
Colorado watershed. The cloud seeding is in the interstate
Okay,
watershed.
I was looking at the Colorado one.
Correct. And that is the Grizzly Creek Fires Studies JFA. There's an expense in 2022, 2023, and 2024. So that's that 500-ish, 550,000 not to exceed over that 3-year period.
Good questions. So I believe that will take us into the capital fund unless we have any other questions on the general fund.
Not
Okay,
seeing any.
moving on. Stephanie, do you want to?
Page 26, if you're looking through your packet.
Thank you. So for 2022, we're starting the year off with just over 4 million. We go into our investment interest. It's coming up a little bit. And then we have our proposed transfer from the general fund in there as well of $1.5 million. Now, as you can tell from looking at this, the last transfer coming into the capital fund was in 2019. in an amount of 200,000. We do have some significant expenditures proposed in this budget, which is why we're recommending that transfer of 1.5 million from the general fund. To go into those expenses, the first thing I want to touch on is that project assistance line item is now 0. All of those are running through the community funding partnership fund now.
That, for everybody's benefit, that's our prior small grants program. The tail end of it is just wrapping up in 2021. So we have no activity this year for the first year, even though we stopped with the grants program back in 2019. So it just took that long for those funds to be expended on the grants. But been replaced in a tenfold manner in the CFP, actually more like 100-fold manner.
And then going into the computers and licenses, we do have a $40,000 budget in this line item for 2022 for some grants management software that will assist us and make us a little more efficient in the operations of the community funding partnership fund. That's why you see the decrease in 23 and 24 as well. Now the next big item on there is our building construction / remodel line item. We do have some expenditures for some architects in there as well that we've been working with in 2022 of just over 100,000. And we've split the construction cost into 2 years. So we're putting 500,000 in for 2022 and another 500,000 in for 2023. If you recall, we had originally $750,000 in that line item for this remodel. But at the discussion at the July quarterly, it was discussed that that would not be enough. So we're proposing adding 250,000 to that budget.
I just want to touch on that. I mean, if you recall, this is going back to the budget meeting, budget workshop in the same room a year ago. We proposed a $750,000 remodel construction budget. I think it was Director Beckley who had a hard time not laughing at us and told us that we would be back with requests for additional funds. And we knew it was low. Part of it was that as a public entity, you put this budget out there, and there are a whole world of contractors that know that when they're dealing with public entities and can see how much you budgeted. And oddly enough, if you budget enough, all of their bids come in at that. And so our goal was to see if we could get a lower bid. Oddly enough, we did get a lower bid that we think would have done a terrible job and would have ended up hitting us. They wanted to do it on a time and materials, with no fixed cap. But they said they could do it for our exact budgeted number. So it's one of those things that you got to watch out as a public entity. So we are coming back and asking for a larger line item. I think that is later in the meeting, we have it as an action item to approve or authorize executing a contract to enter into a contract for that. We can talk about the details then, unless you want to talk about them now, in which case I would turn it over to Audrey and we can do that at this point too, and just take action later in the meeting if that's whatever your preference is, Madam Chair.
Comments? People want to have questions now? Okay. Yeah. Director Munger.
So just really quickly, the 20,000-foot elevation level. So what is the remodel? So I mean, I don't want to what studs and lavatories. And what.
Yeah, we're redoing. I mean, basically redoing the bathrooms, floors, ceilings. Primarily, I think we're trying to save most of the interior walls, but we're actually soundproofing them. So right now, believe it or not, when I talk, everybody in the surrounding 6 offices can hear what I and everybody I'm talking to says. So we're trying to improve that ability. We're fixing some antiquated spaces. If anybody's on board has been in our records room, it is a very depressing, scary place with lots of paper to the ceiling. We're going through a records modernization effort. We will not have those paper records on site, and eventually we will not have them at all as we assure ourselves that we've got them all properly cataloged. So we're changing the use of that space. We're creating some collaborative workspaces for the team. The number of offices is actually, I believe, decreasing by one within the space, but we're creating additional workspaces for people. The main office, it's a fine structure is fine, but it's really just honestly hasn't been majorly renovated in about 42 years. So, and the bathrooms, for instance, are not ADA compliant. All those things that we need to do and haven't done. So, Audrey, am I forgetting anything there? The ceiling lights, yeah. Oh, lights. Switching over to more energy efficient lighting. So,
Comments or questions on the remodel? Did you?
Along with the office remodel, the building is going to be going through an elevator modernization project as well. And so within that same light item is a budget of $37,000 in 2023 and or 2022 and again in 2023 for the River District's proportionate share of that modernization project for the elevator. As Andy mentioned, we're doing a records project, so we have $15,000 in there for a records consultant as well. The other item in there for 2023 is a budget for a remodel of the first floor lobby and bathrooms in our office. It's a common space. So because the enterprise owns the conference room and some of those offices on the first floor, they will have a proportionate share of that lobby and bathroom space along with our capital fund. And that's a budget of $28,000 in 2023. So then going on down to the office equipment, we do have a significant budget in there for 2023 for new office furniture once our remodel is completed of $100,000. We continue to replace laptops and computer equipment. I think we replaced 8 laptops this year, and we got some Chromebooks for some directors, and there's more replacements budgeted for 2023. Then we get into our water conservation and efficiency improvements line item. We have $16,000 in there for 2022 for the architects that we've been working with. And we have $250,000 included in the proposed 2023 budget for that project. And the River District is really the ones driving that project at our office to replace the turf and to be consistent with both our mission and the advocacy of our partners and their projects to remove turf. And then we go into our fleet vehicle acquisition line. Oh, excuse me.
Director Curry.
Thank you. Are you going to come back to Rudai?
I wasn't planning on it, but
Okay. So I thought I understood Rudai, but I think I don't. It shows up here and it also shows up in the enterprise budget.
yes,
And I can't figure out why.
I can help. So many years ago, I believe it was 2013, we purchased around 4,600 acre feet of Rudai water in our capital fund. And we have to pay the O&M on that every year. And that's what that number is budgeted for. Once we begin to, maybe I'll let Andy take it.
Yeah, I'll take this. So the reason we ended up with it in the capital fund is we were trying to solicit West Slope partners to buy out the remaining contract pool that was available in Rudai so that we could collectively repay the debt that was owed and have that water under control of West Slope entities. We got a whole range of entities from Garfield County, the city of Aspen, Pickens County, all the way down to Ute Water, who purchased water at that time with our kind of prodding and pushing. We were left with, I thought it was only 2,800 acre feet that was left in that pool. We purchased it, and the decision was made by the board and management at the time, instead of using enterprise funds, because we didn't have a likely marketable pool or demands at that time. It was hard to justify as a marketable asset, that we would buy it because we had funds sitting in our capital fund and keep it for a rainy day, right? And so we spent $6 million out of the capital fund. It is still sitting as an asset in the capital fund. There are West Slope entities that are interested in that water. We, to date, foresee the potential need at the River District to supplement our water marketing program out of Wolford, should we need to do some rehabilitation work up there in a certain year or two. If there's construction going on, we would need to rely on this water. So we're going to wait. We're holding on to this water. Someday you may have me come to you and say, hey, we'd like to sell this water. I suspect there will be a big discussion about whether anybody in this district wants to sell water to anybody, and instead of just using it for the benefit of the district or our whole. But remember, we sank $6 million into that, and it's sitting in that asset, not really making much money. Although I will say, oddly enough, this year we're about to make some money on it. It's a more flexible contract because it's a newer contract than some of our older Rudai water contracts. So we're actually have a lease that involves both the capital projects fund and the enterprise for that de-icing water, if you will, up in the frying pan. The proponents of that lease, the Anchor Ice, right? The Anchor Ice program, they wanted to be able to release it in December because we see some Anchor Ice formations in December. But we couldn't do that under our enterprise contracts, but we can, for some reason, do that under our capital fund project. So the lease is between both, and we're going to get a little bit of revenue this year for that. It's not really a capital. It's not something we want to keep there long-term. It doesn't hurt us. I frankly think it's probably increasing in value. So it's not a bad investment from the district's perspective, but that's what it's doing. And that's why we have those expenses. Is that all right? Sorry to give you more information than you probably wanted. Okay.
So I was going to hit on the fleet vehicle next. We did purchase a new vehicle this year, and we sold an older vehicle for a net of that 29,700 figure you see there. We did budget, include in the proposed amended budget, the purchase of another vehicle, but we're quickly learning that that's probably not going to occur until 2023. So we might be changing that figure for you at the October hearing, budget hearing. So that covers the capital fund. Does anybody have any questions about the capital fund before we move into the community funding partnership fund?
Ian, what's the miscellaneous income? I might have missed that, but where does that come from?
Good
Nice.
question. I'm trying to recall off the top of my head.
And this is Lucy again. That is for the 951 acre feet of in-channel route high water.
So that would be the water that we just talked about for the
Yeah.
Anchor Ice. Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. I wanted to just revisit with the board the $1.5 million transfer. We said we would come back to it when we talked about the capital fund. So our goal here is to keep a cash balance in there, by 2024, after these construction projects, both at the outside and inside of the building, we're looking at having a balance of 3.7 million in cash. We're comfortable with that as staff, not real comfortable if that number is 2.2 million. And that's why we're recommending that we have this transfer of the 1.5. We could leave that 1.5 in the general fund this year, certainly, and address it at a later time if you want. We could cut it in half as we did or will be doing with the CFP transfer. I just wanted to ask the board for some direction on that at this point, since you have a little bit more information of where we are in that capital projects fund budget.
Comments about the 1.5 million transfer? Director Munger.
So yeah, I support either direction, Andy, myself. I think it's different when we put it into the CFP fund, it's going somewhere else. So if it's sitting in the capital fund or sitting in the general fund, it's for river district use and needs. So I'm okay either way. I don't know that we need to split it down the middle or whatever. I'm fine with the 1.5. It's still our money for our needs that we need to do. So that's my comment.
Anyone else? All right. I think no one feels strongly about this.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on down to the Community Funding Partnership Fund. So you'll see the revenue starting in 2022, the revenue of 4.2 million, that's our annual transfer. The additional transfer of 1.5 will be changed to be 750,000 for the budget hearing. And then we've got a little bit of interest income in there. Now, this is sort of a difficult budget because it's really a cash budget of what we expect to expend in the Community Funding Partnership Fund in a given year. So we're proposing an amended budget of almost 7 million of what we truly think we might expend this year. Some of that number is from grants that were issued in 2021, and some of it will be for grants issued in 2022. And it'll continue to work that way. So in the 2023 expense, you'll see some of those numbers are from the 2021 grant. So just want to paint that picture for you guys that some of these will flow over from year to year because they don't get consumed all in one year. We will probably bring a change to the budget hearing in October for the 2024 budget for this to show there's a story behind this budget. I should back up. Our auditors asked us to put some work into really refining this budget into what we think we're going to expend rather than just showing 4.2 million of expenses. And so that's what we did. Amy put a lot of work into the 2022 figure here to really dial that down to what we truly think we're going to spend. But in 2024, it's just a projected budget. The board doesn't act on this budget. So we're going to bump that number up for 2024 for the budget hearing in October. Just wanted to point that out.
It's interesting to me that you guys have only spent $329,000 as of the end of June. I mean, is it always going to be loaded in the last half of the year, Andy? Is that?
I might actually turn to Amy and ask her why you were so parsimonious.
That's a great question. I think we do see a lot of projects targeting a fall construction season when their ditch turns off. So we do see a lot of work happening in the last quarter of the year. We have seen a lot of projects get delayed a year or so because of supply chain issues, because of increases in construction costs, which is now requiring a number of our early awardees to continue fundraising efforts, looking at federal funding opportunities that take some time to go through the awarding and contracting process. So we have had, I think, more than usual, given some of the impacts that we're seeing on project costs, some of our awarded projects that are moving to the 2023, but I think we are expecting, and we received a number of reimbursements and distribution requests since this June 30th date. So we could potentially pull exactly what the number is, but it would be much higher than 300,000.
Thank you. I'm would be surprised. There is no pipe out there.
Yep.
There really is no pipe. And so you may have a lot less or more, a lot more moving to 2023 that won't be funded in this year.
That's exactly right. And that really hits on what Ian was saying of how we project this in the out years of, each October, because these projects are so driven by our awardees and applicants, as opposed to the River District having some ownership in the project schedule. We will do a lot of truing up during this October timeframe to see, again, in a cash flow budget, what checks are we actually distributing versus what we've encumbered in the CFP fund of what we're setting aside from our awards.
Amy, where's the $1 million for the Wendy Gap project in here?
So I think we have distributed 250,000 for that project in 2022. And so we are expecting, because that project just broke ground in the last few months, that the majority of the 1 million, so the 750,000 plus an additional 25,000 that's allocated through the general fund from decisions made by this board in previous years will be allocated in the proposed budget for 2023.
Thank you. Kind of related question. Do we have term limits on our grants? So I'm just thinking of the Maybell project. It's gotten so much more expensive and we're still fundraising. And so how long is our lead time on these projects?
That's a great question, Director Haas. So the way we contract is 3 years from the award date. So that's our standard period of performance for all of our CFP grants. We made that change in January. We've always had that 3-year determination in the framework, but to knowing that a lot of project timelines, given so many of the impacts with costs, we opted in our contracting just to give all projects a blanket 3-year period of performance, with then an opportunity that we could consider a renewal. But I think we are fairly confident that most of our projects will happen within that 3-year time period.
Thanks.
I did check the general ledger balance, and it's close to 950,000 today for expenditures in the CFP fund through 2022.
Any other comments, questions on community funding partnership? Yes, Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is in regards to terming out these grants. I can tell you that in building pipe projects, if you think that that's where you're going to be and you're not going to get an extension, people start throwing money in the ground just to get rid of it. And things are so much different today. You can't buy pipe. You can't do a lot of these things. We need to let people know that that's where we want you to finish up. But if outside issues and outside ways don't allow it, don't flip out and start doing crazy things. Come to us and say, hey, we need your help. Because that's what we're here to do, is to help, not just to put them in a box, because there's a lot of these places, if they don't have us, they're not going to be able to do it. So thank you.
Yeah, Director Catlin, if I can, just on Amy's behalf, I'm going to toot her horn, so that's why I'm not letting her talk. She's really good at communicating with our partners about that flexibility and about keeping in touch with them. She knows more about the price of pipe than I do, I can tell you that. Maybe Steve and you know more, but I don't know. I might put her up against you. So she really works with our partners. They are aware of our ability to be flexible. That's one of the things we're striving to maintain in our grant program, different than state and federal grant programs, where we work with our partners very well. So, and it's thanks to Amy and Melissa.
Because we're their neighbors.
Yeah.
That gives us that ability to give and take and to help. I mean, to me, that's the best part about this, is you're talking about, you're talking to your neighbors and friends rather than somebody that's looking at a piece of cardboard application. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay. That covers our community funding partnership fund. So now we'll move on into the enterprise fund. So for 2022, we're starting the year off with 29.7 million, just over that. Going into our investment interest, we are, again, we're seeing rise in interest rates. We're now seeing a 4% and above. We do have an investment strategy has been to stay short within 3 years from the time that we just came from. We might be having another investment committee meeting in the near future to discuss changing that strategy now that we're seeing an increase in rates. Rent and miscellaneous income. We talked about that payout from the prior healthcare group. There's about 17,500 of that in there for 2022. That will be done in 22. There won't be any more of that paid in 2023. Going down into our grants, we did miss including that figure for 2022. So that'll be a change we bring to you in October. That figure will be about $163,000. These are grants mainly from the CWCB that we were bringing into the enterprise fund prior to the passage of 7A. Now we're allowed to bring those grants into our general fund. And so we're running those projects out of our general fund. So there probably won't be any grant revenue in 2023 in the enterprise fund unless situation presents itself for it to be there. Those will most likely be running through the general fund. Water sales. If you recall from the memo, we did lose a few water customers this year, some industrial customers. Our normal contract revenue is right about 1.3 million. We do have some special one-time contracts in there. The Anchor Ice contract at Arudai with the CWCB was mentioned earlier. That's in there for 122,000. We also have an elk-head lease to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for $62,000 in there for the endangered fish. We are proposing water sales for our typical water sales are right around 1.5 million is what we're proposing for a budget. Going on down into Denver Water, to remind the board, our annual lease payments from Denver ended in January of 2021, where we got the last payment of 1.5 million. And they became a partner in 2022, where they're sharing proportionally in their share of the OM&R costs at Wolford Reservoir. For the original budget, we were projecting just over 350,000 from Denver. We bumped that up in the amended budget to 427,000, which we have received from Denver. And those are all related to their proportionate share of expenditures at Wolford, as I said. For 23, we're proposing that number to be just over 700,000 due to the increased operations at Wolford in 2023. Going on down, question?
Yeah,
Director Monger?
Ian, can you explain that increased operations other than our legal? And I can't imagine that we can charge legal to that.
That's
And then
correct.
bill it back to Denver Water.
You
So
got it.
That sounds very
Would you like
good.
to
I
direct
like
us to
that
do that?
idea.
That's just the increased engineering and compliance with the comprehensive dam safety report. We're doing a number of soils testing, materials testing, all things that we've planned and are working honestly very cooperatively with Denver on to make sure that that we're all satisfied and we know where what's going on up there.
Moving on down to the project contributions revenue account. We do have our Water Smart grant is in there of $70,000 for 2022. We do have some other cost share. We had the grant line up above, which was strictly grants. And then for our project contributions, these are where our cost share revenues go into. So we have some projects, some purchase orders with the CWCB that are in there for about 75,000. And in 2023, we have basically the remaining purchase orders from the CWCB of 73,000 for that contribution revenue in 2023. Wolford Rec area, we saw a substantial increase from prior years due to the new concessionaire that was hired in 2020 and the change in rates and the change in the revenue split with the concessionaire in the River District. So we've seen a significant increase in that line item over the years. Going into our expenditures for 2022, I mentioned earlier that the staff salaries are split based on employees' time and their timesheets based on their split between the two, or based on their hours recorded between the two funds, with the exception of the Wolford employees, which are 100% enterprise. So, most of those changes, we hit on those in the general fund. I'm not going to hit on them here unless there's any questions about staff salaries, overhead, travel, legal, or admin expenditures here. That will take us into the legal budget for the enterprise fund. And this is where I would like to ask Peter to jump in here.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. One thing I would note on the Wolford expenditures, that it's not just legal things that we don't charge to Denver. It's anything that benefits the River District. So like our water marketing program, if Brendan or Don are doing, Laura's accounting for time she's working on a contract for water marketing, that gets billed solely to the River District's component and doesn't get allocated as an expense to Denver. But things like, maintenance of the facilities and so forth, or if we file a statement of opposition to protect River District's the water rights for Wolford, those obviously are of benefit to both the River District and Denver. We would allocate that. So the details of the legal budget on the enterprise are set forth in the confidential report that is included in your board packet. And so, I'll leave the details to that confidential report, but just note that the proposed budget for 2022 is for legal is about $440,000, which is about a $32,000 reduction from the originally approved budget. That reflects lower than expected special counsel costs in the first half of the year. We expect those costs to have, and we expect them to continue to increase in the second half of the year. And just note that, there is for the same reason, a proposed significant increase in for the proposed 2023 budget. That's all I have on that.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so going down into Wolford Mountain projects. Under reservoir operations, the 22 proposed amended budget has increased significantly due to some upgrades at the River District facilities out there. We are proposing a new heating system in the amount of $135,000 and some increased electrical services out there as well for $60,000. The 2022 proposed amended budget has increased significantly due to several projects, including engineering analysis and lab testing related to implementation of the recommendations from the 2020 comprehensive dam safety evaluation, which we previously discussed at the July quarterly. The 2023 budget reflects continuing work on the implementation of the CDSE recommendations, including a potential update to the risk analysis and further modeling efforts. I keep going on down and we're going to get into Elk Head. That's under the Yampa River projects line item. You'll see there's a significant bump in that line item for 2023. And that's due to some SCADA implementation in the amount of $210,000 out there. We do have partners that share in the operations of Elkhead. I think I failed to mention up above in the revenue, there's a line item for Elkhead OM&R reimbursements. So the offsetting revenue is contained in that line item above for their proportionate share. Going on down to project development. We have an proposed amended budget of just a little bit more than the original budget of $245,000. That's where we're running these cost share projects through that were initiated in the enterprise fund prior to the passage of 7A. Those were all running through the enterprise fund. So these are some of those remaining projects in the enterprise fund, like the Yampa IWMP, the West of Yield study, the Crystal River augmentation study, and the Wild and Scenic Facilitator is in that line item there. We do have a technical study under that line item as well. And there's a $40,000 contract with Hydros in there. The 2023 budget for that line item has dropped significantly from 2022 as those projects start to fall off. So we have some money in there for the West Divide Yield study, some more money for Crystal River augmentation study, and a little bit of money for the ERO supplemental watershed plan in there. So at this point, I'd like to see if there's any questions in the enterprise fund proposed amended budget. Yes, Director Gray.
I just have one. Under the income or revenues is the sale of water. You know, we've had, albeit very minuscule, but some sale of water through the Yampa River Fund and Water Trust, and also transfer from our CFP fund. Is that reflected under the sale of water? That where that's at? Yes. But just included in the 1.5 or whatever.
Yes, yes.
Other questions on enterprise fund?
Okay, seeing none, that wraps up the 2023 budget workshop. Thank you all for your active participation and your great questions. I appreciate it.
How about a 10-minute break? So it is 2:33. We'll start again at 2:45. We'll all right, grab another cookie or potato chips or more health food. That's all health food. All of the above, right? And we will reconvene. We are now on item 3, which is general manager's. Oh. All right, there we go.
Well, the next item on the report really are just 2 items, but I'm going to turn the first item over to Audrey, who's been taking the lead along with Ian and Stephanie and myself on our remodel. We talked quite a bit about that earlier on the budget, but Audrey, we'll turn it over to you to wrap this up.
Sure. So I wasn't going to talk too much, but I wanted to update everyone that we have the current bid from RS Wittrig Construction, Inc. The bid that we have is $1,027,000 and we're $27,054. Butchered that. $1,027,054. There are some contingencies that the contractor has built into that to account for increase in material cost that we may experience, as well as just a general contingency. He's confident that we will not exceed that amount. We're hopeful for that as well. And so I have a proposed action for the board authorization for the general manager to enter into an agreement with RS Whittrigg Construction, Inc. for services related to the office remodel in an amount not to exceed $1,028,000, subject to review and approval by legal counsel.
Okay, discussion. Yes, Director McGinnis. We push your button there.
How's that work out on a square footage per square foot?
I think it's around 120. I can figure that out real quick. $121 per square foot.
Okay, so nobody does more construction than to my left. Is that in the ballpark? Sounds pretty reasonable.
Yes.
Yes, Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question from somebody who's not familiar with any of the people in your marketplace. Do these contractors have good reputations? Have you seen work they've done? Or they, I know you're wanting to do business with them, but have you seen things they've done and feel good about it?
Yeah, I probably can take that personally. But for this project, they're largely a captive contractor for Valley View Hospital in Glenwood. So if you've ever been in the Taj Mahal in Glenwood, it's well done. I unfortunately have the experience of hanging out in there occasionally. So they do a good job. We've actually checked their references. We've talked to people who work with them. They were very impressive compared to the other folks who, just head and shoulders above the other folks who were looking at what we're doing. So.
Yeah, and a couple things that stand out, I think, for them is they have their own crew. A lot of the other ones that we were talking to were going to be relying exclusively on subcontractors. They also have a lot of experience working with other tenants around, so we have other offices in our building that we need to be mindful of during construction. But they also focus a lot on sound and dust mitigation. So those are some of the special qualifications that we really appreciated about them.
So right across the road, we're renovating the old CDOT building. And that's right at, I think, 6,200 square feet, and we're spending $1 million. So it's very, very comparable.
Director Munger.
So I must have missed it. So or maybe you said, or maybe you didn't. But so how's this fitting into our purchasing contract? Is this a sole source and we're negotiating out a contract? Is that what we're doing?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So
did we go out for advertisement on this? Or?
we did request bids. Yeah. So we utilized our architect to reach out to contractors. And then we met with 4 in the June timeframe. We received bids from 3. And then this is the contractor that we recommended going forward with.
And were they the low bid then, or were they better contractor?
Yeah, no, Director Munger, they were not the low bid. And I don't know if you recall, we talked about this in.
Yeah, just for a minute.
Yeah, well, and we talked back in July as well,
Okay.
but yeah, there was one bid that was lower.
Right.
But it only on its face, not in the end. And so we felt that bid was a way to get the foot in the door, and then we were going to get hit with some pretty incredible price increases once they actually started the work. And then in terms of references, these were there were objectively far more positive references and actually financial dealings with these guys than the low bidder. The low bidder was not well respected in the subcontract field. And given that they were going to rely 100% on subcontractors to do the work, it was going to be a real challenge to see them actually completing what they needed to do.
So I'm good with all that. Again, I just
It's important.
recognizing the optics here with us, the public entity and public money and the rest. And so I just wanted to hear what you just said. We did advertise, we did go out for bid and the rest, got 4 responses. And this is the pick out of the 4 responses. Correct?
Yeah, we only received 3 bids. One of them was that we talked to, well, they were unavailable to work in our time frame.
Thank you, Director Gray.
So when we, in the budget meeting, we talked about the landscaping renovation or taking out turf and so on. And I assume this renovation is just in our space in the building. So are the other owners, other people that are renting, helping out with any of the landscaping? Or is that all on us?
Well, right, landscaping is not included within this bid that we're talking about today. Yes, and with respect to the renovation of the interior office, that's 100% on us. With respect to the renovation of our landscaping or upgrading the landscaping to reduce water consumption, that is a common area. And so the other units will be paying some percentage. But as I think Ian alluded to, we're truly the ones driving that need to reduce the water consumption. They all think it's a fine idea. But they're not really interested in being a model, which is what we're trying to do, is show to all of our constituents. If you recognize today, there's frankly, we need every water user sector to reduce their consumptive use. And a lot of our urban friends, even on the West Slope, often say, well, we don't use all that much water. We'd like it all to come out of ag. And so we'd like to demonstrate that it can come out of the urban area and help people understand that it can be done and be functional. So we anticipate, just to put it, we think that project, we're likely to end up, I think we own about 45% of the condo space, 40 some. 38, I'm sorry, 38. It is likely that we will be paying, a little bit over 50% of that total cost in the landscape. So some percentage more, but not all of it.
Okay. And one more quick question on the office renovation. If the building is 30 plus years in on the mechanical, the furnaces and stuff, are we looking that that's going to be left alone until everybody participates?
Yeah, unfortunately, the mechanical heat HVAC system is a building-wide system. It circulates air through all 4 floors. We know that's coming, and it will be a post-interior renovation expense that we'll be paying our share of at that time.
Great question. Other question, Director McGinnis.
I forgot, I'm sorry, but I meant to ask, so who's our owner's rep? Is that the architect that's representing us?
Yes, our architect, we have a separate contract with them to represent us with the contractor.
And then who handles the disbursements? Do they have mechanical lien protection in there, i.e. clearance and cosign?
Yeah, we haven't yet drafted the contract. We're just seeking your authorization. There will be mechanics lien releases signed as we're paying. Although Peter may speak to this as a public entity, mechanics liens are slightly different than they would be otherwise, but we will make sure we have all of our liability protections that we need to. In that
Okay, and
contract.
then also came to my attention is we were listening to these contingencies. Now, these contingencies, especially with the mobility of prices today, are those at cost, or do they get to do an add-on? And how do we handle our change order procedure? Is that handled by the owner's rep?
So let me answer the first question. So the contingencies that they have included would be for at cost, not at a markup. And I think, we're trying to work quickly as far as getting the approval from you all, recognizing that you don't meet that frequently. And then we still need to get the agreement, get the materials ordered. So those contingencies would allow for maybe an increase in flooring material price from what was contemplated in August to when we actually get the material ordered in September, October timeframe. And then as far as change orders go, I think that we would be the ones authorizing those change orders.
So or this is really an unusual period of time, and Steve could speak to it much better than I, but I mean, between now and when we actually get it, we could have some 3%, 4%, 10% increases. That's what I've experienced on a family situation we're dealing with. I mean, they're like moving up every week on us. So do we have a cap? I just want to make sure, and maybe it's better for Peter to look at those contingencies, that at least we have a little incentive for them to watch prices as well. It's
Yeah.
not just a pass through, put an ad on or administrative cost and so on.
You know, one of the things that part of what we like about these contractors is that they have said they do not want to start construction until they know all of the materials are here.
On place. Okay,
And,
good, good.
and so they do not want to be held up by material delivery delays. And in fact, you know, Audrey had a fairly disconcerting conversation with them yesterday when they said, hey, hold off on anything because we got that freight, the rail worker strike. We're not guaranteeing you anything right now. And luckily that appears to be resolved. We'll see if it actually gets signed and approved by the rail worker union members. But that would have just screwed every project in the country up, right? So is there something that could happen to us during the construction? Yes. We're hoping by their approach of insisting on getting the materials on site before they start, that we'll actually know that up front. With respect to those variable materials, I think we can control it somewhat, Scott, but not entirely. I agree with you that that's an issue.
All right, thank you.
Other questions for Audrey or Andy? All right, there's Director Munger.
Are you looking for a motion? Is that
Yes.
Where you're heading? I would
Yes.
move staff recommendation.
Do we have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? All right, the motion passes and you've got your direction there.
Thank you, Audrey.
Great, thanks.
Next, we have draft, you had in your packet a memo from Brendan Langenhausen and a draft letter from the district to the CWCB with comments on the water plan. Want to give Brendan an opportunity to introduce the subject and then have a discussion. And what we're really looking for is, you know, do our comments cover what you think they need to? Are there additional areas or things that you want us to say? We assume that each of you have read the draft water plan in its entirety. And so we are looking forward to very detailed comments from you. So,
Yes, all 400 pages or 300 or whatever it is. Thank you. Hello all. Again, my name is Brendan Langenheisen. I'm the Director of Technical Advocacy. And we put this memo together. It was actually a lot of staff all took time and took in preparing this letter. So it's not just from Raquel and I, it's from a lot of us on staff. But just to give you some background, so the water plan is put together by the CWCB. They did the first one in 2015 and have started this new water plan, this draft of the 2023 water plan back even before in 2017, 2018, when they were starting to put together some climate models. So they developed climate models for future modeling. They did the technical update, which was a really deep dive into modeling the different basins to understand the water supply and the water demands and the gaps, which is what they call it, the difference. Where does the supply not meet the demands? And then after that, they started the basin implementation plans, the BIPs. And so that was completed in January of 2022, so just this past year. And then the last 10 months or so, they've been really working on the drafting the water plan. So what we have now is the draft water plan. It was put out in July and it's open for comment through September 30th. And so some of the highlights that we had from our initial review are documented here. We start out the memo just talking about some general comments, and I'll go over those right now, and then go into our letter goes into some more detailed comments on specific pages or chapters. But if you guys are interested in those, I'll let you guys read those yourselves. Our comments, we have a first series of comments all related to Trans Mountain diversions. Really honing in on this discussion of the TMDs are identified in the plan, and in some contexts they're even mapped, which is an improvement from the 2015 plan, but there's still a disconnect of talking about the TMDs between the two basins. So the basin of origin and the basin of use, and really identifying. So if they're talking about the basin of use, identifying how much of that water comes out of the Colorado Basin and what projects, where does that water come from? So we have some comments in here about really tying that together. And same in the Colorado Basin, really identifying every TMD and really talking about what those impacts are. So, or what those systems are, I'm sorry. Again, just trying to contextualize for the readers, what is a TMD? Where does it come from? Where are the impacts and the implications of that project? And then also on the basin of use, they talk about new projects, but also really making sure again that that water is really tied to where does this water come from? So from there, we also had, making sure that the whole systems are shown, not just a portion of it. So not just a tunnel, but maybe showing the full system. One example would be the CBT project. They don't go into Willow Creek or Windy Gap and how all that's connected. So really trying to pull in how large these systems are and where they take water. I think it just will help to contextualize the impact that it has on the basin of origin. We also found that the draft water plan kind of overlooks some of the long-term environmental and economic impacts of TMDs. And one of our last comments on TMDs was that when they talk about specific basins in the Arkansas and the South Platte, they don't really bring up the Colorado Compact compliance issues that are raised. So they bring that up in terms of the Colorado water basin, and as well as the other tributaries, so the Yampa and the White and the Gunnison, but they don't really talk about it in terms of the South Platte and the Arkansas, who have a significant supply out of the Colorado Basin. So again, pulling the interconnectedness of the state through the TMDs. The last TMD project or comment that we had was kind of a significant one that we've raised before and throughout the BIP process. This was a big Colorado Basin Roundtable issue, which was that these new projects for TMDs, so the Windy Gap firming, the Moffett firming, and some of the other proposed projects are not modeled and not included into the technical update that the water plan is based off of. And so there's just a big hole missing in what is being, as we look into the future of what these projects and these impacts will be. And so we have a strong statement in there about really needing to include this. The state does recognize that in one of their action items, which is to start some collaboration around that, but we feel it needs to be even stronger and make sure that they include that modeling going forward. We have some comments about stronger stances towards water conservation, particularly on end users of the TMDs. So really pushing conservation and efficiencies, particularly before and prioritized above additional TMDs. Yeah. And then another big comment that we had, a theme, was water quality. So water quality isn't discussed as thoroughly as we think it needs to be in the water plan. Just looking at our last meeting in July, there was a lot of comments from the directors here about algae issues, warming waters, particularly in the upper Colorado and the other places. So really kind of focusing on not just quantity, but water quality. And that correlation is becoming stronger. It's always been there, but we're seeing more of those issues and wanting to call attention to that in the water plan. With climate adaptation, the water plan really addresses this as more of a future thing. You know, the climate will change or could change or probably we think we're past that. We're noticing warmer temperatures and we're noticing drier times. And so trying to bring that more into the present tense. This is an issue now. We're seeing it. I mean, just looking over the last couple of years and the temperature rises that we've had and the impacts that we've felt on the West Slope, particularly on those, such as, algae is one of those, but upper Colorado River issues, lower efficiencies in our runoff. So from our snowpack to the runoff in the rivers. So just trying to bring more awareness that this is an issue right now for us that we're experiencing as part of this aridification of the West. We want to affirm 1041 powers more in this plan. We want this issue to be raised a little more strongly and have the state affirm those. There's a lot of talk about storage. Storage is going to solve the issues or be one of the solutions in there. And although storage, particularly we're concerned about storage from TMDs and really tying that to how is this storage, we still need to look at the basin of origin. So storage can certainly help. There are great benefits of storage. But in the terms of TMDs, making sure that we're tying that back to the basin of origin as well. That, saying a storage in the South Platte or in the Arkansas can solve the South Platte and Arkansas's issues, but we need to tie that back to where's that water going to come from? So.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, what we're trying to say is that storage of Colorado River water and tributary water on the West Slope can help us adapt and mitigate to the changing climate. Storage of additional Colorado River water on the Front Range only makes the need for adaptation and pain suffered over here much worse. And so all storage is not equal from a Colorado River perspective.
And the last comment that we had was adjusting some need for more flexibility of use of water that's in storage, particularly for more environmental purposes or to address the issues that we're seeing, the warming waters, low flows, algae issues, things like that. So that's just a general comment. It's more of a how can we utilize the buckets that we have for the issues that we're seeing arise. So that's just a highlight of the comments that we have, but love to hear from you guys if there's anything you'd like to comment on. Yeah.
All right, great work on that, Brendan. Comments, yeah, Director Haas and then Curry and then McGinnis.
Thank you. A quick question on 1041. So I've been hearing it. It's been mentioned at Water Congress. I noticed it's on the agenda tomorrow. Like, what is the nature of the conversation right now and how is that playing out in the water plan? Or is your point in here that it's not explicitly recognized and it should be? Or what's
our point is that it's not explicitly recognized in the water plan and just trying to raise it so that it is.
Okay.
And that those powers can be more informed.
I'll just add to that. Park County has hired outside legal counsel to help them with their comments specific to the lack of recognition of county role in the water plan and specifically under that 1041. And I believe it's tied in with the Trans Mountain diversions, I think, because it's under attack from Front Range providers. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead. Well, actually, if you don't mind, I was going to respond on the 1041 issue. There is a panel on that tomorrow. I'll be moderating. But I'd also add that Vice President Chandler Henry asked of the Attorney General at the Water Congress a question about 1041, and I was a little iffy on his response. It was not. Yeah, they said that he said it was a gray area and there's pluses and minuses, and it wasn't sort of the more friendly response that I thought that question would have elicited from him. So something that we should be looking at or keeping an eye on.
Director Curry.
Thank you. So I'm going to offer some thoughts from a roundtable perspective. And I think we're so used to this gap approach that we've seen since 2015, since the original plan was done. And I think that's actually fundamentally a flawed approach. And the reason I say that is that it puts an emphasis on new construction, which then in turn drives the grant programs, the state grant dollars. And the staff at CWCB constantly refers back to, well, gee, it's in the water plan, so this must be what we want to do. But what's happening is that the BIPs that are coming forward from these roundtables, and the Gunnison Basin, we had 300 plus projects, and almost all of them are existing infrastructure improvement. They're not, no one has any illusions that we're ever going to be able to afford new storage. What we got to do is maintain what we have, and that's the Gunnison Basin's top priority. And that is not the top priority of the water plan. That I don't understand the disconnect between the narrative in the plan and the BIPs that came up through the roundtables that clearly emphasize maintaining what we've already got. So I think in thinking it over, there's I would love to see the River District mention that protecting and maintaining existing infrastructure is just as darn important as supposedly building new reservoirs. And so that's one thing. I want to say also that I think this letter is fantastic, because I first read the water plan and couldn't barely think of a thing after I read it. And then I read your memo and thought, oh yeah, there are some issues here. Is there enough conversation in the plan about compact risk? Right now, there's a bullet that you meant that's in the memo that talks about how there's a risk to the Front Range in the event of a Colorado River compact compliance issue. I would venture to say that there are risks on both sides of the divide, and that the other compacts in the state where we're also out of compliance on the Rio Grande, the Republican, the Arkansas, you go down the list, maybe I always feel like the water plan does not spend enough time talking about how that drives our needs in the state, as well as hydrologic constraints. So I'm just wondering if you feel like you got it covered already with the comments that you've got in the letter. If you want to strengthen that, I don't think anybody would object to that. And then just this issue of how the grant funding is being pushed by the water plan is really important that we think about what I perceive as a disconnect between the available grant dollars and the needs out in the field. And I know the plan, they don't spend a lot of time on how much money the legislature puts into water supply reserve fund or into the water plan grants. But the fact of the matter is that that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where the plan's being implemented. And the dollars are all water plan grant dollars, except we're going to get an influx this year, thankfully, since severance tax dollars were up. But this need to address existing infrastructure, I think, is so critical. If the board itself doesn't, if you're not, if you think I'm kind of out in left field on this, I can definitely submit my own comments. But I just wanted to bring it to our attention, because I know Amy faces this all the time and we all do with the community funding program, that we're seeing these people come to us because they can't get state dollars, because the water plan is all about building new reservoirs on the Front Range. And we've got to, I think, say something to CWCB about the emphasis. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the time.
Thank you. Brendan, do you want to respond to that, or do you want to hear more?
Yeah, I think some of the funding opportunities, I think we can look into that, of how can we capitalize on more funding? How can we get more funding just in general? And as you said, maybe not necessarily put all of that funding into new projects, but maybe more of the maintenance of the existing infrastructure. Absolutely.
Thanks. Director McGinnis.
A lot of the discussion is on the beneficiaries of the TMDs. And once a year, I go to a group event where I'm in the presence of the mayor of Aurora, the mayor of Denver, and so on and so forth. And at the time that this Colorado plan was originally put together, and recently the discussions of it, we didn't have a crisis on the river. I mean, we all knew we were short, et cetera, et cetera. But now the hottest ticket out there is conservation. And Aurora recently has stepped forward and said, no more turf lawns, no more this, no more that. And at this meeting, I kind of got the idea that they're of the opinion, okay, if we're going to suffer, you got to suffer equally, regardless of status of seniority or water rights or things like that. So if we're not going to grow any grass in Aurora or allow sod in Aurora, then in Grand Junction, where we have the water rights, but we also live in the desert. And as you look out this window, you eliminate sod and some of the things they're talking about, you turn this thing into a desert again. You'd make it look like north of I-70 and south of I-70. So I'm just wondering, as we start talking about conservation, that from my opinion, we have to be able to differentiate, look, we agree with conservation, but what you're conserving and what we are has a lot of different factors to be considered, not just paint with a broad brush. Okay, Aurora, and Aurora made the statement in the paper last week that, hey, we hope this is statewide. Everybody's either volunteers or required. Now that's not a summary, but a direct quote, but not a direct quote, but a summary, but that wasn't the paper. And it was expressed up there. Well, we're going to be the leaders and we hope the whole state, including us, those who have the best water rights, suffer equally to us. And the system's not built up for equality. So anyway, I just don't want us to get lulled into somehow when we agree to some of these things on this water plan or TMD, that those people on the other side are looking for blood from us when we ask for blood from them, even though they ought to be first in line to have to give something up. But anyway, thoughts on that, Andy? Or
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that, Commissioner McGinnis. I think you raise a good point. I mean, I think that probably the single biggest difference between conservation here and conservation of Colorado River water that is brought across the divide is that Aurora, for instance, very commendable steps they're taking. Let me just say that. I had lots of discussions with them, and you'll get a chance to meet with Marshall Brown, and at your October meeting, Marshall's the head of the Aurora Water. He's going to come over and explain exactly what they're doing. The reason they're doing it isn't to save the river. So let's just be clear about this.
that's right.
They're not, they are, the city of Aurora, the tiny little place that it is only about 50% built out. So they don't have enough water for their future development. They are conserving water in their current, in their land use code to be able to try to create some water, but even that won't create enough water for their future development under their plans. That's an important distinction, right? We think that there's room in there for them to participate in a statewide demand management program where they could bank some of that if they're actually able to save some current water use and reduce it, that if a demand management program rolls out, they could actually enroll that in a demand management program, get credit for it until they actually build out the need for it in the future. So in those interim years. I totally, I think that's important to get them to participate in any kind of a statewide, if there is a demand management program, they need to participate. That's one way they could. With respect to West Slope water conservation and West Slope water use, we have return flows that go right back to the river. There are lots of studies about lawn irrigation and what kind of return flow comes off lawns. I would say even with the return flows, though, at this point in the river crisis, I may take a slightly different perspective than you, Director McGinnis, and obviously I take the lead from the entire board, but I think it is critical that all of our water users actually conserve water, and not regardless of seniority. It's really a situation here where our economy and our way of life will be fundamentally disrupted if we continue on the same path of using water the way we are today. And just looking at the good science that we have on hand, the water consumption in the Colorado River as a whole and in our state is unsustainable. It just isn't. We're demanding too much. We're using too much for what the supply is. Yes, we think junior water rights should be the ones that take the primary hit. And yes, 98% of the TMDs are junior to the compact. But we have to recognize reality in terms of political, legal issues that will arise, economic might issues that will hit us on the West Slope if we push that to the precipice. And so, you know, do I think we should be encouraging water conservation, for instance, at our building? Yeah. In our urban areas? Yes. Does that mean that we have to convert everything to Scottsdale? Or, well, that's maybe a bad example. They have a lot of pools. To Tucson, you know, is there a way to stay to keep our areas habitable and enjoyable and attractive? Yes, there is. But we've got a fundamental question here in the next decade or so that we've got to face. And I just want to try to reframe that a little bit, but the difference between us and the TMDs have a lot to do with return flows and 100% depletive capacity in the TMDs as opposed to our water users. But that's, it doesn't change the fact that I think we all need to conserve. And
Yeah,
so,
the issue of all of us needing to conserve, not on the table. I agree with that.
okay.
But the issue is, do we suffer our standard of living over here with senior water rights to assure that Aurora continues to get more growth on their end? And frankly, we have a system in place that's not an equal system. It's not a system of equality. It says first and right, first and use, first and right. And that if you're senior here, you get to use that and so on.
Right.
Well, when you hear these people talk, especially if they're junior, and since Mesa County is clear at the top of the senior,
Yeah.
they want what we have. And of course they want to equalize things, kind of like in a socialistic type of system. That's kind of discussions that just off the cuff, I'm listening to these people talk and say, oh yeah, we do this statewide. So I'm not disagreeing with conservation, and I practice it myself.
Yeah.
I'm just saying at some point we have to draw a line and say, you know, seniority does count.
I agree. I would ask, with that in mind, all of you who will be here for our seminar tomorrow, listen carefully to Peter's panel. We have a representative from CAP who sounds an awful lot like Aurora. And we'll have a representative from IID who's going to sound an awful lot like Grand Junction. So just listen and understand the similarities here, because it's really fairly startling. So you make some good points. So I just,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, other comments? Yeah, Director Curry.
These are great comments that you guys made, and I'm like Director Curry, when I first read the plan, I knew I didn't feel good about it, but I couldn't think why exactly. So thanks for putting it in some specific language. Good job.
I wonder, should it also be signed by our board president? And how you all feel about that? I think that would strengthen it to have it signed by the board as well. Yes. Director Catlin.
Thank you. I think one of the things to go along with Director Curry, it seems to me like the quickest, cheapest water we can save is in the modernization of the delivery systems in agriculture. You know, earthen canals lose 20-30% of the water that we divert. If we can get that water back into our system for delivery, it will help not only us, but people downstream, because that's water that we don't lose. And I think that's one of the things that the water plan seems to miss. I think we should be, and what we're doing with CFP and those kind of things, we're stepping in the breach in order to allow those kind of things to happen, because typically Colorado wants you to borrow the money to buy down projects. That's what happened with us. So I think we should mention it. You know, I don't know how hard we pound the drum, but I think that's one of the things that those of us that are in the irrigated agriculture need to be looked at, as we're not only a living reservoir that you can just come up to the head gate and shut it down 20% and say, hey, look at that. Because that 20% reduction at the head gate influences everybody down that ditch. So if you can pick back up that 20% that was lost, that's nobody's calculating, then we can do some things without having to shut the head gates, because those pipe deliveries don't take that much water. In Montrose, one of the things that happened is we had a 21 CFS ditch. It was supposed to be a 12 CFS ditch. That's what the water rights were. But in order to get it to the bottom of the ditch, we were diverting 21 CFS. After that pipe was installed, we never diverted more than 10 CFS, because the demand down that pipe wasn't everybody on at 100% every time. So that one little short ditch, well, it was not short, showed me that there are things that can happen with piping and modernization of these delivery systems. And I think one of the reasons that the delivery system question doesn't get answered on the Front Range is everybody's concerned about the water they're putting into the ground, because they're going to pump it a year or two later. And it's like a storage program for them. So they are always worried about losing that secondary usage out of those irrigation wells along the Platte River, particularly. If you talk about this to the Platte River, they just nearly have a fainting fit. Well, yeah, but, you know, and I understand they're farming a whole lot more water farm ground today than they ever have because of those augmentation programs in those wells. But on the western slope of Colorado, piping systems looks good to me. Uncompahgre is a great demonstration of that. It helped firm up the water to the west where the rocks and the gravel pits are. And my farm would probably make a better gravel pit than a farm, just so you know. Those use a lot more water. That's why there's more allocated to them. But when we pipe the east side, because of the pollution problem, salt and selenium, it raised the amount of water that we could divert and send to the west side. It has some real benefits. I think maybe we can mention that. And if I need to, I'm not much of a writer. I'll tell you about it, but I don't write about it very well. So maybe somebody can take dictation or something. Anyway, thank you very much.
All right. Other comments? Yes, Director Momger.
So I'm fine. You guys did a great job. I'm with Director Catlin. This is the words and all that stuff. So I guess I'm asking us, what's our process here? Are we gonna approve this in form for the chair to sign? Is that kind of what we want to do? Or for Andy can sign it as himself anyhow right now. I'm just asking what we're going to do for the process.
You know, be honest, we were just looking for direction. If you want to take action, you can. I'm sure, I think it's a great idea to vote and direct Marty to sign it when her absence, and it'll teach her never to miss a meeting. But I think, I mean, we're happy to set it up for her signature and mine. It might be easier that way. And I think Marty might have a few more thoughts about what we should include in it. We can do that too, if there's no objection. We really just wanted to make sure and check in that we were headed in the right direction with these comments. That's our, we don't need a vote unless, Peter, you think we do. That was not set up that way.
No, I don't think we needed a vote, but we're happy to entertain it as well.
Yeah. Head nod.
Okay, and I just want to second Brennan's comment at the beginning, but emphasize Brennan took the lead on this. He did a tremendous amount of work. Some project like this, you know, comes in and your plate's already full, and most people are like running for the door to not be the person left standing. Brennan is very different. He was more than happy to take it. He didn't think about all of the other stuff he had on his plate at all when I asked him. No, he was really very, very receptive to it, very willing to do it. And I have to say that the entire staff chipped in on this. I mean, it really was, he assigned sections and had a couple meetings where people went through what their comments and thoughts were. And I just appreciate the ability of Brendan and the rest of the staff to work together and really come up with a coherent product. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great work. All right, we are now on to item 4, General Counsel's report for executive session.
Well, Andy and I were talking at the break or earlier today, and we, between us, although interstate matters are taking quite a bit of both of our time recently, and it seems like you can't turn on the radio or log on to the internet or pick up a newspaper without reading or hearing something about the Colorado River. We don't have any specific update today that cannot wait until the October board meeting. So we don't see the need to convene into executive session to discuss an update on interstate matters. And so unless the board feels otherwise, my recommendation would be that we defer that subject until the October quarterly meeting.
We'll have lots of things from tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah,
Right.
we'll be buried in it tomorrow.
Right.
And
Right.
you know, a lot of it is you hear it as it's coming out, really on an almost day-to-day basis.
Right. All right, then that jumps us to our final item, which is the community funding. Oh, you have one more?
So, well, I just wanted on the general matters, in terms of, if I could just take a
Sorry.
second. I did want to just mention that in addition to the interstate matters, Jason and I, and increasingly Brendan as well, are spending a lot of time on the Ramshorn application in Water Division 4. We're spending a fair amount of time on CRCA implementation. Andy and I and Brendan and Jason are as well on that matter. Some of the things that, never make it to the board, and I think I would just mention one in particular, is the, things that happen in between the meetings. We've had an interesting thing that happened with the operations that we conducted with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for a trade of water that we made in 2021 with water that Parks and Wildlife had in Heart Lake, but the very headwaters of Deep Creek, where they needed to release a lot of water from Heart Lake in order to do some maintenance. And we sort of traded water with them for water in Wolford. And we held a little bit back in Wolford that we might have otherwise released. And with the idea that we would then exchange that water back in 2022. The division engineer had a little bit of a different interpretation on how that exchange worked out. And at one time was saying, you got to release the water in 2022 River District. And, and our position was, hey, we stored the water in Wolford, under its own storage right. Nobody was hurt by this operation. Nobody, there was no harm, no foul. And it represented, it was about 1,300 acre feet or so of water. It was a fair amount of $400,000 worth of water, basically. And with Don and Brendan and Jason's help, we, although we didn't necessarily agree with the division engineer's analysis, he finally did approve our basically of keeping that water in Wolford and being able to release it, at our discretion, whether it's this year or a subsequent year. And those sorts of things happen frequently. That's just an example, but I just wanted to mention it. That is, it turned out to be positive. We kind of don't necessarily agree with the analysis that the division engineer conducted, but he did end up approving it. So I just wanted to let the board know about that. Happy to talk about any questions about that. There's obviously lots of examples, and staff-wide, we do things, on a day-to-day basis that are consistent with River District's goals and objectives and our strategic plan, but either because they happen quickly and it's turned over and that it's kind of done, they never really make it to the board level review. So I thought I would report on that.
Great, we appreciate that. Any questions for Peter? Comments? Thank you. Now, I was getting ahead of myself. We'll move to the community funding partnership.
Great. If Amy and Melissa want to come up.
right, good afternoon, board. I think Stephanie is going to pull up just a few slides to walk us through this process, but Melissa and I, and for those listening online, this is Amy Moyer, the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the River District, and we are going to bring our 2022 accelerator grants for board review and action. Just give it a second. And while I get started, I just want to thank the board for your support and direction as we moved forward with this accelerator grant process. Similar to the water plan effort, I do want to thank the full staff at the River District. It was really an all hands on deck effort to get this accelerator grant process out, from the incredible graphics that our external affairs team helped us with, to the technical team review, to our leadership that really played a heavy role in helping us think through this process and review the applications that we did receive. And I also want to give a particular thank you to Melissa Wills, who is my counterpart in helping run the community funding partnership. And really this would not have happened at the speed that we were able to do this without her support and the whole team. So Stephanie, you can move on to the next slide. So I wanted to bring up this graphic that you've seen in previous board meetings as part of our efforts at the staff level to secure bipartisan infrastructure law funding. And this was an infographic that we created just to demonstrate to our water users and ourselves as we were, unpacking the amount of steps that it takes to lead to a project idea, to construction, and then asset management. And as we spent a lot of time talking with our water users, we realized there's a significant gap in funding opportunities that help with the conceptual design and feasibility that can lead to a successful application at the federal level. And so our federal counterparts are saying to us, we need shovel-ready projects. We need at least 30 to 60% design. And we saw an obvious gap and an obvious need for us of how we could potentially leverage our community funding partnership dollars for a pretty significant return on investment when these projects can be successful at the federal level to receive the broad infusions of money that we're seeing at the federal scale, first with the bipartisan infrastructure law, and what's likely to continue with the recent additions in the Inflation Reduction Act. So you can go to the next slide, but I thought that was helpful background to give rise to our accelerator grant opportunity that we ran as part of our community funding partnership. We announced this opportunity in early June with an application deadline of August 1st. So it was a very quick turnaround for our water users. We spent a considerable amount of time doing outreach, getting on the phone and over Zoom and out to projects to garner some support. And if you go to the next slide, these are some of the areas that we offered to support in funding. And so it's the early stage feasibility, design, preliminary environmental review, the benefits analyses, the early engineering and grant writing that leads to a successful federal funding application with a target date of we really want our funding to set projects up for success so they can apply in 2023 federal funding cycles, potentially 2024, with a preference to getting applications ready in 2023. And the reason for that is we see those as pretty critical years for bipartisan infrastructure law funding, especially going to infuse money into the Water Smart programs as one example. This is also a complementary effort to state funding that was provided through House Bill 22-1379 that authorized $5 million to the CWCB for similar efforts. But we also saw a gap in timing of that funding opportunity is not live yet. I think soon it will be. But we wanted to get our accelerator grant process off the ground and going so that our projects can begin through this need for feasibility, design, engineering, so that they can meet these 2023 targets. So we really found a gap that we could fill to support our West Slope projects from multiple fronts. And then in terms of deliverables, the key deliverables for us is that projects submit a federal funding application, and that they also have a pre-submission conversation with federal representatives to ensure that these projects are competitive. These projects are on the right track with their application. So we asked applicants to do that prior to applying to our accelerator grant. And then we're going to also ask our awardees to commit to doing another pre-submission meeting with federal representatives, again, with a strong eye towards wanting to see our recommended projects succeed in receiving federal funding. And this being, again, a core piece of our bipartisan infrastructure law efforts at the district. Move forward, Stephanie. So some quick stats of what we did receive. Again, in a very short turnaround, we received 17 applications requesting a little over 1.3 million in funding. The median request amount was about 46,000. We received projects across 10 counties in our district and across all 3 of our river basins. And I'll just pause here. The memo noted the thought process on bringing these requests to the board is that we did receive a high number of applications. This is a new funding opportunity that we're running with the Community Funding Partnership. Again, a core strategy for us to capture federal funding. And so we opted to bring all of our recommended projects to the board as a block, both because of the amount that it is collectively and to keep the board updated with this process and to let you see where things landed after we ran this opportunity this summer.
So Amy, just to clarify, you were looking for a single motion for all of these, but I presume if anyone wants to pull one out and vote on that separately, we could do that as well.
That's correct.
Thanks.
Next slide, Stephanie. So in terms of federal funding, we did have an array of federal opportunities that these projects are targeting. These are, I think, a lot of the programs that we expected and anticipated seeing our projects target with this funding. Some are looking at the broad PL 566 watershed opportunity that's run through the NRCS. We have a number of projects targeting the salinity control program when the funding announcement begins next year. We have a suite of the Water Smart programs across multiple of their categories, from efficiencies to environmental water resources, one project targeting the water reclamation and reuse program, and then a number targeting their drought response program. And then we also have projects in tandem looking at the NRCS water management entity route through the EQIP program. So quite a diverse array of federal funding opportunities that we continue to learn more as staff, and we've had our own conversations with our federal representatives to do our own due diligence of what makes projects successful. We've talked to them about individual projects so that we could make the most informed decision as staff when we make these recommendations to you all today. So next slide, Stephanie. In terms of project types, we did again receive a diverse spectrum of some watershed restoration, really targeting the infrastructure law funding that's geared towards natural infrastructure, municipal redundancy projects, a number of delivery system upgrades in terms of diversion structure upgrades, ditch system improvements, piping, lining, straightening of ditches, a lot of projects that have fishery and aquatic habitat components, projects that are looking at some small scale storage opportunities, looking at how to provide more security and augmentation supplies, and look at opportunities for increased flows that can also have a aquatic habitat benefit and a temperature benefit as well. And then looking at technological components of SCADA additions and some automation in our systems. And as we get to the action item, I do want to say we included in the board memo summaries of each of our applications that we're recommending for funding, including those that we've asked to pause for additional application development, and the projects that we are denying at this time. So you have those in your board packet rather than going through each of them individually for time purposes. But I want to talk a little bit about our review process and the vetting that we did as staff. And so we took these through the same analysis that we take any community funding partnership request through. We had our own review at the staff level. We included our technical team and our leadership team to discuss these projects and our recommendations, with an added review component of really looking at these projects from an angle of the benefits versus the risk. And so when we looked at the benefits that these projects provided. It was looking at how closely these projects tie to our mission at the River District. How closely do they tie to our goals within the community funding partnership? We also looked at, in terms of risk, what is the likelihood of achieving federal funding? And so again, we had conversations with our federal representatives asking those questions of what makes these projects successful. And so we ranked these projects looking at how risky are they in terms of their opportunity for success at achieving federal funding? What are the potential permitting barriers? What would be the potential feasibility barriers to see these projects succeed? And so we really wanted to recommend projects that have high benefits and a low risk opportunity. And so we achieved that by having pre-application meetings with many of our applicants. And then that was a main driver for our recommendations that you have in your board packet. So again, we have recommended to an action item to approve our recommended projects. We have 12 projects we're recommending for funding as a block, which totals $493,314.50 in funding. So I will pause there. Happy to answer any questions. Melissa and I will do that together.
Right, Director Haas.
Yeah, thanks. More of a comment. This is brilliant. I work across the basin. There's nobody else that has a funding source like this, that they can get projects going. So it just really is a huge gap that is being filled. So thanks.
Other comments or questions for the team? Yeah, Director McGinnis.
Yeah, I asked Amy before the meeting, and I thought she gave me a good explanation. So I had a question for her, and I said, hey, do we have any kind of restriction of doing any kind of funding that's providing legal fees for one party that may be opposing another party? And we don't want to get into that fight. And I was wondering, you just wouldn't kind of repeat the board to the board what you told me about some of the safeguards or bumpers you put into place to watch out for that. I think it'd be beneficial.
Sure, Director McGinnis. I think that's a great question. And we don't have anything formal, at least in our framework and guidelines or any rule that I'm aware of, but we are extremely cautious when we see those line items. And in fact, one of the projects that we are not moving forward with and one that we're asking for further application development was in part to better understand some components where they wanted some legal research into their water rates. And so I think we were always cautious when we look at legal fees to not compromise our own assets at the River District. But I might pause just to turn it over to either Andy or Peter if they have any comments on the legal component. But I will just say, in the 12 projects we're recommending, there is not a line item for legal work. It's solely focused on the feasibility, engineering, grant writing development, but I will turn it over to our leadership for any other comments.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any grants in the CFP process, or even in the past, off the top of my head, at least under our former small grants program, where we funded legal fees specifically. Now we have had in the legal budget, legal assistance to others, where we have allocated specifically funds from the legal budget to River District constituents to pursue a specific issue. One of those, I think, was the threatened abandonment of the Yellow Jacket rights. We helped fund the appeal on that was against the state. There were no local opposers, and obviously had there been other River District constituents on the other side, we likely wouldn't have ended up funding that. But as far as sort of a conflict between River District constituents, that could take the form of a legal dispute, or it could take the form of an engineering or boundary dispute, or they could arise anywhere, in other words. And there's only so much background due diligence that can be done. If that comes up during the review, that would obviously be a flag. It's possible something like that could come up after the funding as well. And we would want to know from that and learn from it. But there's no specific sort of legal check as to, is this going to be a legal problem versus another River District constituent?
Yeah, and I would just add, Director McGinnis, I don't recall a time where we've been asked to fund one side of a litigation through our grant program or now the CFP. It's a good flag and good issue to raise. We just haven't had anybody ask us for those. I would say if it fell under my discretionary amount and it was a battle between two of our constituents, I would probably deny it and let them appeal it to you if as a board, because I just don't think that's, you know, our funding. No offense to all the lawyers in the room, but our funding program is designed to actually get stuff built, not and get, you know, water flowing, get, you know, it's not designed to fund litigation. And so it's not saying that we have a prohibition, I would say, just to be clear about it. If there's a worthy project, this board will be the body that would end up considering it and deciding if it wants to fund it through the CFP.
Director Haas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one more question. How many times do we think we might do this? I saw the 2024 deadline, but what's your thinking on this?
That's a great question, Director Haas. I think we will always consider these accelerator grant opportunities on a rolling basis as part of the bounds of our community funding partnership. I think what we're focused on now is how can we complement some of the funding at the state level for similar efforts. We are having good conversations with our counterparts at CWCB as to what are their requirements, how similar are they, how quickly can they get the money out the door. And so again, we are continuing to have conversations with our water users to help them secure federal funding. And so I expect this to be an ongoing program. I think we'll have additional discussions as to whether we do, put another deadline or try and shine a spotlight, because part of the hope with the accelerator grant process was really to incentivize our projects to consider looking at federal funding opportunities.
Hey, Director Munger.
So I guess we're getting ready to make a motion here, but so I just a general comment. We had this conversation at our last meeting. We talked about it and gave you the thumbs up, go ahead, get going and get after it. Looks like you did great. I don't know how the heck we would say no to any of these. Looks like you had a great conversation and a good discussion of your criteria and the process that you went through. Again, I guess I feel a little lost out here in the Yampa Valley, Yampa Basin. We had this discussion at our meeting last night. It's like what Fonzie said, I didn't even know I was in trouble. So, so I don't even know. So we had this conversation last night. So we talked about the BIP projects too. Like we have 90 on our BIP too. It's like, and we got 4 done in the last 10 years. So, really, so if we don't even know what we don't know. So I'm worried about that. And I don't know. So if between you guys and the state, we can figure out some of these education matters that we can get out to these people that myself and Tom maybe is included too, but the people that don't have the ability to fell through the federal record and the register and figure out what's available out there. So anyhow, it's a good job you did. And that's all the comments I'd make. Thank
you. Anyone else? I think we're ready for a motion.
I'll move.
All
Staff
right.
recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Haas and a second by Director Gray. All those in favor? All right. Any opposed? All right, motion passes and those 12 projects will be funded.
Thank you.
Any questions for Amy on the projects denied or ones for more information before she leaves us? Yeah, Director Gray.
I don't have any questions. I read thoroughly through the ones that were denied and I thought that was appropriate. Some of them were denied temporarily or paused. Good job.
Yeah, you can see public comment.
Yeah, is there anyone online who'd like to make any comments or ask any questions? And Stephanie, I guess you will see if people have their hands raised. Nothing. Okay, thank you. Andy.
Before you adjourn me, I just wanted to cover a couple of things. I think that Stephanie has done a good job, but want to make sure directors all understand, those of you sticking around for tomorrow's seminar and requested a room, have one over at the Maverick here on campus. I have found it convenient to leave the car parked at the Maverick during the seminar and just walk over back to this building. It's pretty easy to do. You might get lost, but it's a pretty straight walk. Unfortunately, we were not able to get the entire staff there. They have, they're at capacity tonight. So Peter and I will be there, but the rest of the staff unfortunately is downtown at the Hampton. So you get the two sour faces if you want to hang out with us. I'm actually going to a Grand Valley Water Users Association board meeting at 6, so I will be around later, but not right at dinner time. But I would ask, we're excited about this seminar. We think it's timely. I will just warn you, my comments, I'll try to make sure everybody knows they're my comments and not necessarily those of the board. Tomorrow during my opening, talking about the compact and whether or not it can be adapted to fit this reality. I don't think you'll hear anything that surprises you, though. You've probably heard me drone on and on enough. But I think it's a really great seminar, and appreciate you all of you who are able to make it, to be there. It is, again, one of those things that it takes an entire staff at the River District to put together. But our external affairs team, Marielle and Lindsay and Zane, have really done the tremendous work getting this thing going, but they certainly did not do it alone. Every single staff member has helped and will help tomorrow. So I just want you to know you've got, despite the common perception of government employees, I think the River District is a strong contrary to that stereotype. So anyway, thank you, and really looking forward to it. There are expense vouchers. I think Stephanie has emailed those out to everybody. Is that not yet? She will be, for this. And then, October board meetings right around the corner. It always surprises me how quickly it comes after the budget workshop and the seminar, but that will be another day and a half meeting. So don't plan on a day-long meeting. That's all I'm saying. And look forward to everybody being there to the extent you can be there. So anything else, Madam President?
Just a huge shout out and thank you to Ian and Lucy on all the budget prep work they did, and to Brendan on the comments, and Amy and her team on the community funding partnership. And of course, you guys, it's really a well spent day. So it was great, and looking forward for tomorrow. So
Conference is, yeah, right in the ballroom.
right. All right. And with that, we are adjourned.